From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Pikiell and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Rant. This is not an episode I thought we'd be recording 2 weeks ago, but here we are. 3 straight losses. The first 2, really not much of a concern. You lose on the road to Indiana, no big deal. You lose on the road to Illinois, disappointing, but certainly in the grand scheme of things, no big deal. You lose at home by 10 points to Nebraska, and the sirens go off. The panic button has been smashed. Awful defensive effort. Crowd leaving early. Caleb McConnell talking about complacency. I mean, Fonseca, you were there. Just give me a sense of what level of, on a scale of 1 to 10, we should be here on the panic meter with what happened last night.
As always, I'm the rational, optimistic, big picture kind of guy. I would never say Rutgers is doomed before they're doomed. I think they're still going to make the tournament. I really do. I think if they don't make the tournament at this point, injury or not, it would be a collapse of epic proportions. I mean, they're going to have to lose to Minnesota on the road or lose 4 of the last 5 games, which I know people think they might not win a game of basketball ever again after last night. I don't think they're doomed, right? I think they'll straighten it out. There's enough talent on this team. Pikiell has shown he can overcome worse situations in the past. They've done this every year. But that being said, when you're favored by 14 points and you lose by 10, when you give up 82 points to the second least efficient offense in the Big Ten, when you make Kaisei Tominaga look like the actual Steph Curry, not the Japanese Steph Curry, I mean, that's concerning. And they were getting dominated all over the floor. It was a layup line. They shot 74% on twos. That's the worst 2-point defense they've had all century per Ken Palm. They couldn't stop inside. Granted, Nebraska was hitting some tough shots. CJ Wilcher, Plainfield native, just bombing shots like all over. You can't really do much about that, but it was everything else. You touched on this. I noticed it at the time. Guys bickering with one another during the game. They looked defeated. I don't know how much of that is because of Mawot Mag's injury. I certainly think the defensive issues are Mawot Mag's injury. A lot of it has to do. I think he plugged up a lot of holes on that team. And big picture on the losing streak, I agree with you that those 2 games last week are not concerning in and of themselves. But I do think the last 2 losses are concerning in the way they lost. You don't score for 10 straight minutes against anybody. I don't care if Illinois is the second best defense in the Big Ten. You don't score a point for 10 minutes. That's very concerning. And then when you can't get a stop against Nebraska, to the point where your fans are leaving the building in droves with 3:26 left in the game because they have no hope of you coming back, I think it's fair to say that while full-blown panic is not quite reasonable yet, I think it's fair to say that things are wobbling very much right now.
I just hated the body language. You mentioned it, and it was just very apparent. And it was every trip down the floor for a while where they're just looking at each other. Paul Mulcahy, I mean, it was just one slouch. Caleb McConnell, these guys are your leaders, and they just looked defeated. And they were, I don't want to say pointing the fingers, but yeah, there's a lot of that going on, Pat. And I that to me, and I tweeted it, just like it seemed like, all right, this was a players only meeting kind of moment where I wonder if they're going to pull each other into that locker room and say, look, this wasn't us. This is not us. Right. I mean, I just saw some things, non-basketball things I just didn't like.
I mean, Brian's such an even-keeled guy that I'll sound the alarm. I'm smashing the button on panic mode.
All right.
On panic mode, because you're right. They do need an all-team meeting, and they're out of sync. You saw them yelling at each other on the floor, which was a real first. They need a major adjustment some way, somehow, and that's where I'll leave it. Whether it's coaching, whether it's the players stepping up, or something I can't even think of, they need to just regroup, and it's time to smash the panic button hard.
I think coaching, and Steve Pikiell after the game says it's on me, and that's what the coach says every time a team loses, and I get that, but I think he's right. He has not adjusted to Mawot Mag's loss. You saw it late in this game, Brian, and tell me if I'm wrong, because it was Valentine's Day, and honestly, I did not think I had to babysit the Scarlet Knights last night. I saw Nebraska. I think, well, they'll win this game. But from what I watched, the full court press isn't working anymore. Or when it does work, it's clear it's taking a toll. This is a 6-man team now. This team doesn't have the depth to play this way for long stretches of time. that layup line, the way the defense wasn't helping, I just wonder if this team's tired. I mean, are we making too much of this? Because it really seems like he was playing in a certain way with Mawot Mag, who was one of the best defenders in the Big Ten, and now you're still trying to do that. I don't know. I'm not sure that's the right strategy.
I do bring an interesting point about them being tired. They're playing. The thing is, they're playing the same amount of starter minutes as usual. They had one of the lowest bench minute rates in the country. They played their bench 20% of minutes before this. They're playing them 20% of minutes now. It's just that the personnel they're playing versus having Andre Hyatt coming off the bench as a sixth man. You have Derek Simpson, who's a freshman who hasn't played high level basketball at this intensity for this long with this much responsibility. So I do think that takes a toll. I don't think they have any can do what Mawot Mag did defensively in the press and in the half court. I mean, he made up for so many holes at the rim, on the perimeter. And I asked Pikiell about the press because you're right. It looked like they did it more often than usual. I didn't have the numbers in front of me then. Pikiell said they're always a pressing team. They do it all the time, which they do. But here's the numbers. They averaged 10.4 possessions of pressing defense per game before last night. Their season high was 17 possessions in one game. They did it 29 times last night on 39% of their possessions. They had 15 presses in the first half, 14 presses in the second half. So it's not like they were pressing mostly when they're down. They pressed most of the game. And it is fair to wonder if guys are getting tired, if they can't rely on that anymore. And but to Pikiell's point also, they were horrible in the half court as well. It was just a terrible defensive performance overall. Maybe that is to do with the press, maybe not. But he has to do adjustments. And the other coaching thing is that, not just last night, it shows that they really lack depth in certain positions. I mean, they can't afford to have Cliff Omoruyi off the floor because behind him, it's a huge drop-off. And not only does that hurt them when he's off the floor, it hurts them when he's on the floor because he's playing defense almost not to foul because he can't afford to get in foul trouble. So he's getting just layup lined. I mean, Derek Walker was 5 for 5 on layups in the first half. It with zero resistance because I don't know. I mean, Cliff had 5 blocks, but that really overestimates how good he was defensively. I thought he had a pretty rough game.
There's no question.
That's another thing. Is he playing a little timid because of that? So there's a lot going, and because of that lack of depth, there's not a lot of options for him to fill these holes. So this is going to be one of Pikiell's toughest coaching jobs yet, just kind of figuring out these rotations and figuring out how to fill his hole.
The one name we didn't mention, Pat, Cam Spencer. I mean, this guy was Big Ten Player of the Week just a few weeks ago. It feels like from afar, and this is like the few YMCA games I've played. It feels like he was standing open a couple of times, and they looked at him with the corner of their eye and like, well, we can't throw the ball there because he might shoot. I get it. That's an exaggeration, but it does feel like they've lost confidence in him. He's lost confidence in himself. He was on the bench for a stretch there when they're down 10 points.
Yeah.
Right.
Great point. And it's to put some context on who gets the player of the week every week. Zach Edey or Trace Jackson Davis every single week. So for someone else to get it was amazing. Cam Spencer, you want to say it's just like a shooter getting cold and at some point he's just going to get hot again, but it's his contributions in the other parts of the game. And I think that was big down the stretch too. You saw him get that deflection when they kind of clawed back on that little run, but they need him on the floor. And I think it's just not just as a shooter, it's for all his other contributions, but I can't say that the players have lost confidence in him. I think that's an overreaction.
Well, certainly they're in a jam right now because it can't. Andre Hyatt played great, but he can't be taken. What did he take? 17 shots, 18. I mean,
18. He was
18 shots.
Yeah.
I mean,
and every big one down the stretch too.
Yeah, he was the only one who had the confidence to shoot. Yeah, it's just there's a lot going on here. All right, let's break this down now. Next 5 games: at Wisconsin, Michigan, at Penn State, at Minnesota, Northwestern. There's not I don't want to say good team. There's certainly not a top level Big Ten team on that list right now. Michigan, maybe they're certainly talented. Wisconsin stinks. Penn State's very erratic. Minnesota's terrible. Northwestern, okay, give them credit. They're having a good year, but it's at the rack. It's funny. You would look at that and you would say, before this game, you look at that and say, hey, no reason they can't win all those games. Now you look at it and you're like, all right, well, I mean, how do you size up this stretch, and what does this team have to do now these next 5 to make to take away all the drama with the NCAA's?
Game you have to have is Minnesota. You cannot lose to Minnesota. If you lose to Minnesota, that's like their first Q4 loss. That is like forget panic button. That would be a disaster. So assuming they beat Minnesota, right? They would have to win at least 2 of the other 4 games. 3 of the other 4 games would put them pretty safely in. I think you're underestimating Northwestern. They're pretty damn good. Like I think that's the hardest game left on the schedule. I think the Penn State
Harder
game,
than at Penn State.
yes. Well,
Yeah.
playing at Penn State is like playing in my backyard. There's going to be no atmosphere. It's the same thing. I mean, I get it was Valentine's Day last night, but they're hosting Illinois in a game they have to have, and there's maybe 2,000 people in the stands, right? Like, the danger with Penn State is not the atmosphere; it's that Penn State bombs threes. They shoot 40% on threes, and like they did last night with Illinois, they can just bury you from beyond the arc, right? And Rutgers has shown that when teams are hitting threes, like they hit them last night, they cannot keep up, right? That's the danger there. Northwestern's a better team. They're going to finish in the top 4 at this point. They just beat Purdue at home at Super Bowl Sunday. A little sneaky.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
They guard the hell out of everybody. Veteran guards. Anyway, that's the toughest game. I think Saturday's game at Wisconsin is going to set basketball back 100 years. It will be the worst game you will watch in your entire life. I'm just sick to my stomach thinking about covering that game. But if Rutgers could out Rutgers Wisconsin, big step, adds another road game. And puts them back on track. They need to just put the train back on the tracks. But more than the importance of the win as far as metrics, it's just not making it 4 games in a row. And then from there, you beat Minnesota. You win one of the other 3 games. You're fine. Now, if they win one of the last 4 and the one win is Minnesota, they're probably still in by the skin of their teeth. But you're really playing with fire. Yeah.
Well, that's why Wisconsin's important, Pat, because you just have to get back on the right track. You have to get the confidence back. You have to prove that this is. I mean, you don't want this thing to spiral, and that's what's at the risk now. Yeah,
absolutely. And Michigan, the way Jet Howard can take over games could be tricky too. I'm not going to put that one as an easy win. But isn't it crazy how last year Rutgers' schedule was absolutely brutal down the stretch with every one of those ranked teams, and they had to beat every single one of them. And now we get these final 5 games. It's like, it's
a great point.
It's a really interesting parallel. Like, we're just holding on by the skin of our teeth this year, as opposed to last year, where it was like the greatest stretch of Rutgers athletics history.
It's so true. The competition really does. It's a great point. Yeah, you can't just look at the competition. You have to look at how the team's playing, and yeah, that's they had to win all those games to get in. They did, and now they have to just kind of scratch out a couple, and we'll see if they will. All right, let's jump into true or false. I only have a few topics here, but it'll segue nicely into football as well here as we do this. So, all right, let's start with the schedule, fellas. True or false? Rutgers will win at least 3 of its final 5 regular season games and put all this panic nonsense to rest. Fonseca, true or false? Are they going to do it?
True, because if they don't, I don't know what we're going to be talking about here, but it's not going to be good.
True. All right, Pat?
True as well.
All right, I'm going to go false. I just think that I'm worried about this team. All right, so true. It's true or false. Rutgers will win 2 or fewer of its final regular season games. You guys said true to the first one, so we know the answer there. I said so I'll go true here. True or false? We're going back to Dayton. This is what I'm panicking about. We're going back to John Glenn International Airport.
Who?
True or false, Fonseca? Are you going to go there and finally get to see John Glenn's home?
That beautiful Red Roof Inn, just calling my name. No, false.
Okay. Thank you. Pat?
Oh, I got to stick with the true. I got to stick with the false here, since I said they're going to win. They're going to win.
Let me make it clear. I'm not going back to Dayton. But the 2 of you go back to Dayton, that's for someone else to decide.
I'm going to Tulsa, Oklahoma for the NCAA wrestling championship.
Oh, that's good. You're not going to Dayton either. That's just Fonseca can have the Red Roof Inn all to himself. Perfect. True or false? Isaiah Pacheco is the best news Rutgers football has had in a year. Fonseca, true or false? How important was that win? That was that game for Isaiah Pacheco in the whole run?
Maybe even longer than a year. I'll say true.
Okay. Pat?
I'm going to say false, because of the emergence of Sam Brown was like the life savior of this program.
That's true. All right. I'm going to go false as well, because this is a good one here. True or false? Pacheco's NFL success is another illustration of why Greg Schiano was right to fire Sean Gleason. True or false, Brian? Is that what the heck happened? Where was this guy? Where was this guy? He was in Piscataway. Remember that? True or false?
False, because it's not Sean Gleason's fault. He had traffic cones for an offensive line.
So, okay.
Who writes these true or false? Whoever comes up with these is just a pure genius. I mean, this is
pure genius. Yeah,
pure genius.
I'll tell the staff that you appreciate it. True or false? Answer the question.
True. It's the Sam Brown thing all over again.
I will only say, and I'm going to tell you the story with the Super Bowl. There's 2 things that came up, but I'm going to go true as well here. And finally, true or false? Yeah, Pop was great, but you're most happy for Michael Burton winning his Super Bowl ring. True or false? Brian Fonseca, how do you feel about Mike Burton getting the ring?
Great for Michael Burton. I'm still more happy for Isaiah Pacheco. So I'll go false.
Okay, right.
For everything that Isaiah Pacheco has gone through winning the Super Bowl, you have to feel good for him. So
okay, true. I just have I think a lot of guys who covered those teams have a soft spot for Michael Burton in their hearts. And it's amazing that guy, 8 years in the NFL, gets a ring, playing a fullback position. And there was a moment in that game, and I didn't see it at the time because I was writing, but there was a moment where Andy Reid sent out some 1988 formation where he had a fullback and a tailback in the backfield, hands off to Pacheco, gets 10 yards. Burton, it's a nice block on the play. It's great. That's like the Rutgers. They need to get that highlight and put it on all their social media accounts from now until the September opener. All right, let's talk a little Super Bowl because it's funny. There are two things that came up all the time about Pacheco that just made me laugh. And this is the media day. People kept on saying, the first one was he like this at Rutgers? Was he like this at Rutgers? Like this, I mean, dancing his way onto the stadium, and I mean, just like this ebullient personality. And I had to say, not really. I don't know if it was just that, the Rutgers grinder made sure that the personality, we will not have this personality in our program, and grinded it out of him, or what. But no, this is a different side of him that we didn't see a lot of, at least publicly, maybe behind the scenes. That was the first thing. And then the other thing was how did they not use this guy properly? And I had to answer that question a bunch of times. And it was mostly I'm saying, look, what you say, Brian, they didn't have exactly the greatest offensive line in the world. And he did have a lot of big runs, once he got free, he would break off a 50-yarder now and then. So those were the two interesting points.
And I do think that he has won a bigger platform in the NFL, obviously Super Bowl, biggest platform probably for a football player. That just wasn't available at Rutgers. College football is more of a guarded sport. Personalities don't really shine, so maybe that's just part of the whole deal. But I thought his story was pretty well documented here. I thought Sarge was the first one to really put it to light, and I think people always knew. I just think that now the biggest stage is kind of amplified.
Pat, how much do you think they can use this? I mean, they've had guys in the obviously in the Super Bowl before, the McCourties, Ray Rice. I mean, there's a long list of them. Is this an important thing though for
huge? It's huge. It's huge. And I think bigger than anything is that you finally did get to see that personality, because that's what a recruit wants to see, that hey, I can be this social media star. I can rack up the NIL dollars. So I think they can use it. I'm almost positive Rutgers will spin anything positive out of Pacheco. And didn't he say to you that I'm bringing it back to Rutgers and we're going to have some kind of celebration at Rutgers?
He's going to live off this. He's coming back to Jersey. Yeah, he was very excited about doing that. Yeah, so yeah, maybe they'll do a Super Bowl tour, stadium signing at Rutgers. Bring the Lombardi Trophy with him. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and that's and it really, and the important part was that he certainly carries that with him. I mean, there's no question. He carries Jersey, he carries Rutgers. He doesn't hesitate to bring it up. Both those guys, I mean, Burton too, talk a lot about their experiences in New Jersey. So it certainly can't hurt. Put it that way.
Burton was a walk-on at Rutgers as well.
He was a walk-on, yeah, not for long. I think he got the scholarship pretty quickly after that. But yeah, he was a preferred walk-on. Yeah.
As I was going through the list of Super Bowl players, there were so many that were Gary Brackett, Sean O'Hara, Michael Burton. All these guys that go on to brilliant NFL careers were guys that couldn't even get a scholarship out of high school, which makes sense for why Rutgers was so good during those years.
It is amazing. Yeah, and Burton, just if you don't know familiar with this story, I mean, just a guy who's worked every step of the way, and it's so hard to have a human conversation at opening night, which is the media circus with all the clowns, and if you guys aren't familiar with Super Bowl, it's just a complete cluster, what. But I found Burton on the floor there and just talked to him for about 20 minutes, and just a guy who worked his way here. There's no other way to put it. There's no flashy, there's no explanation for this. It's not like he came up with some unique formula to become, a valuable NFL player, but he just kept on finding a different way, different roles. He's an important special teams player. I think he's a leader. I think they love him. I mean, you saw, and I tried to paint this scene in my column, but I'm standing there talking to the two of them, and Patrick Mahomes barges into the locker room, and just makes a beeline over there to where Pacheco and where Burton are standing, and it's just Like, I love you, brother. He yells at Pacheco, and then he climbs over. Like, he's a guy who, I don't know what level of drugs he needed to get through that second half to have one of the, his Jordan flu game, the way he overcame all, that ankle injury. But he climbs over 2 equipment bags to bear hug Michael Burton, who's just, with this look on his face like, holy crap. It was just a great moment. And the two of them, obviously, to soak it up and have that is also good for Rutgers as well. That's what I got from Phoenix. All right, you guys want to take some insider questions? Can we do that?
Let's do it.
All right. We have a lot of, let me just say, the level of panic in our Rutgers insider program is high. So it'll be reflected in the questions. A lot of Steve Pikiell questions. This one I was not surprised to see, but is Steve Pikiell too nice? It's great that he's the anti-Mike Rice, but the lack of working officials, lack of aggressiveness in the portal and willingness to show kids the door, overuse of the red shirt, goes on from there. Does Pike need to get in someone's face very publicly or call someone out in a post-game presser like Micah Shrewsbury? Mulcahy is a senior leader who can take it. Seems like a prime target with his hot temper and dirty play. Wow. Should Pike go Herb Brooks on this team? We're mixing sport metaphors. I love this question. Go ahead, Fonseca. You answer this one.
Was Steve Pikiell too nice when Rutgers beat the number 1 team in the country 2 years in a row?
Clearly, he should have rubbed it in their faces. I'm kidding. Go on.
Was Steve Pikiell too nice when he landed the highest ranked recruit in program history, when he got the highest ranked signee in program history? I think people are grasping for straws and everything to kind of rationalize this. I do think Steve Pikiell goes hard on his team in practice, when no one can see. I do think some of that hunky-dory exterior personality kind of melts away. He is probably saying what a lot of you guys are thinking in practice behind closed doors, but he's never been a guy that's going to call out his team in public. That's just not who he is. I don't think that means he's not holding them accountable. And just because he's not Tom Izzoing the referees, practically grabbing their shirts, begging for calls, doesn't mean he's not whispering things in their ears, telling them they missed calls there, asking for charges here and there. Now, maybe he could have shown some guys the door that probably don't belong on this roster and maybe filled it in with some portal kids behind him. But I think he's made pretty clear that his philosophy of the program is to keep guys there for a long time, build a culture, not to pick up guys off the portal just for talent because if they don't fit, etc. I think he has a certain way of coaching, his philosophy of a program, for good and for bad. I think the guy has to completely change his personality, be someone who he's not, just because they lost 1 game to Nebraska. I think that's a bit silly.
Yeah, he is who he is. I mean, that you don't want a guy to try to be. That's the first thing. That's how coaches fail all the time, when they try to be someone they're not. So don't. And he's not too nice. This is, if anything, that's the best part about him. It's his niceness. All right, let's a lot of questions about Paul Mulcahy as well. What's up with Paul is the general one. His encore complaining seems to be really hurting him as a leader, and now he's showing others up. Then another question about the leaders: is Paul putting too much pressure on himself? In some cases, his anger has gotten the best of the Rutgers team. All right, let's just talk about Paul in general. What do you see him, Pat? I mean, is it a case of him putting too much on his shoulders? I mean, the guy did have 12 assists. He's playing every minute of these games. What do you think?
I think Rutgers is at its best when Paul Mulcahy is actually scoring and not dishing.
Yeah.
I think he's putting too much emphasis on the assists and trying to be too fancy with the ball. And that's just an outsider's observation right there. But from a leadership standpoint, I think everything you're seeing on the court is a part of his emotional game, which is why he is the leader that he is. He is emotional, he is fiery, and that's what makes Paul Mulcahy. So I want to see him get back. When Rutgers had that amazing stretch last season, it was Paul Mulcahy scoring. And when Paul Mulcahy isn't scoring these last 3 games, they're losing. So I think that is the biggest key. Stop dishing the ball as much and don't be afraid to back guards down in the paint and put it in the bucket.
How many shots did he have in that game, Brian?
3. He had 3 shots against, and then he had 4 shots against Indiana. And listen, he's passing up open shots too, and he's a good shooter. He's shooting like 40% on threes. He just doesn't take enough of them. I totally agree with Pat. We saw it down the stretch against Michigan State at MSG. He took over, scored like 9 of the last, whatever it was, or he scored 17 points in the second half, whatever the numbers were. He just took over. And for a team that doesn't have a bona fide scorer, especially not with Cam Spencer's in the slump that he is, they need somebody to just put the ball in the basket. And as much as Steve Pikiell doesn't like it, when the ball's going in the basket, they play better defense, and it kind of feeds off each other when you're not scoring, et cetera, right? The way that Caleb McConnell is the alpha dog on the defense, they need Paul Mulcahy to be the alpha on the offense. They need him to start taking shots. And as for the emotional aspect of it, I agree with Pat. That's kind of who he is, for better or for worse. When things are going well, it goes well. He's admitted he's a bad loser. And with the 3-game losing streak, we talked about players kind of yelling at each other at the end of the game. Paul was probably the main culprit in that. That's not what you want to see from your senior leader, but that's just kind of the way he is. I think it's why a lot of Big Ten fan bases don't like him. And I think it's why when Rutgers is good, Rutgers fans do like him. But when things aren't going well, it does tend to backfire on him.
Sure. You love that intensity. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we're getting another thing we're making too much out of Paul Mulcahy. Off other than basketball stuff, yes, you're absolutely right. He needs to score more, but to think he's doing something wrong, body language, it was just a rough game at the end of that game. I think you can shrug that one off. All right, question about Derek Simpson from Joe Hayes wants to know: is this time for Simpsons to get a lot of Paul Mulcahy's minutes, or just get more minutes? I looked; he had 19, so clearly he's the sixth man. I don't know. Is this a rotational thing where we're going to see more Derek Simpson, Brian?
Derek Simpson is the sixth man. They're essentially running a 6-man rotation and then throwing in 7 and 8 when it's like Dean Reber or Antoine Woolfolk having to fill in for Cliff or Jalen Miller if they really need defense like they did last night. Yeah, they're going to have to play a lot of Simpson and kind of let him play through his freshman mistakes. I don't think playing him for Paul Mulcahy is particularly smart, because I don't think he's ready to be the starting point guard, the main ball handler on this team. I think we saw what happened when that happened against Temple. It would be kind of the reverse issue with Paul Mulcahy, who assists too much and doesn't score enough. I think Simpson would look to score a lot more and not really be able to facilitate the offense and help others around him. So I do think he has a role on this team. I think Rutgers really needs him to play well to be successful now that Mag is out. But I'm not sure he's this hidden gem on the bench that's going to completely revitalize the offense if they put him in for Paul Mulcahy.
All right, this is an interesting one. Alex from Freehold asks: if you could protect 5 Rutgers basketball players from injury in order, with one being the most protection possible, what would your order be? Please include Mag in this discussion. All right, so he's trying to find out where we value Mawot Mag, I'm guessing, and how big of his loss is. I think Cliff is number 1. Pat, I mean, you disagree? What? Give me your thoughts on where this would be here.
I almost think that the way that Caleb defends every single position might be number 1. If you lose that, you're losing a big piece. But Cliff, I think they're 1-2. I think they're 1-2.
Okay.
And then Mulcahy 3.
All right, I would put Mulcahy 2, Brian and then I would put put Caleb 3 and Mawot 4. I mean, am I wrong? Do you think Mawot's ahead of anybody?
Cliff is number 1 in my mind, without a doubt, just because there's no depth behind him.
Yeah.
Like the ceiling of the team would go significantly lower without him. I would put probably Mulcahy 2, just because there's no other guy who can lead the offense the way he does on the roster. I mean, who would be your main?
No, good point.
Derek Simpson, right? And then I think Caleb and Mawot are a very interesting distinction. Maybe this is just like recency bias because we know what happens when Mawot isn't there. I'd probably put Mawot 3rd and then Caleb 4th. Yeah. Caleb isn't playing. He's still playing good defense. I don't know if he's at Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year level as he was last year. And then 5th, I'd probably put Cam. But I think those top 3 are really indispensable guys.
That's fair. I just think Caleb, when you build a team around defense, and this is your guy that is the defender, that's why he's so important. But I hear what you're saying about Cliff. That depth issue is a major concern.
Yes, yeah, it's amazing because even when he plays poorly, you're right, he has to have him out there. And I wonder about Cliff. Like, is this changed? This is not a question, but it's a good question. Has this changed the thinking on Cliff about another year of college basketball? Do you think what's happening this season, Brian, any indication?
I can't read Cliff's mind. I don't know if this affects it for him personally, because even if you have a bad year, you can still go to the NBA because you're done with college, you think you're old enough, you want pro coaching, etc. I don't think his stock has risen at all. I think he has not expanded his range as he had hoped. In fact, I think he might have even minimized his range. He can't hit anything outside of 2 feet away from the basket. He's struggling really hard to finish around the rim when it's not dunking. He's 4 of 21 on threes this year, which is 19%. He stopped shooting mid-range jumpers, at least. That was an issue early in the season. He just stopped doing it. But the thing is, though, I don't know how much more he can develop with another year in college, right? If his goal is to make it to the pros, I think pro coaching is going to take him over the top, because his athleticism is, I just think that going to the G League would be better for his pro career than staying another year at Rutgers. Now, if he wants to stay another year at Rutgers, give it another hurrah, go deep in the tournament. If he dreams of winning an NCAA championship or something like that, or if he values his education, I don't think it's impossible that he comes back. I just think that if he was dead set on leaving entering the season, I'm not sure that even a bad year will reverse that thinking.
He's not getting drafted.
No, I don't think he'll get drafted unless it's like a late second round flyer. A team just falls in love with his athleticism because he's a freaky athlete. And they think, I can make this guy, I can fix his mechanics, I can make him a 30% 3-point shooter or whatever. That's certainly possible. I don't think there's a chance at all that he's a first round pick, even if it's like the bottom half of the first round. I think he's pretty solidly, if he'll get picked, if it'd be right at the end of the draft.
All right. Finally, we've got a bunch of recruiting questions. Every time a team goes in this tailspin, the recruiting panic starts. The biggest question is how this impacts recruiting, especially with Bailey and Harper. Would missing an NCAA tournament blow up recruiting? What's the latest status on Kurtang and Donnie Freeman? What else we got? I'm looking through the questions that just came in. You got any recruiting insight? I think we put too much into one win or one loss when it comes to what's on the minor recruits. Do you agree?
I actually got a call from a source this morning that said, how Ace Bailey committed because they won at Ohio State? He actually just decommitted because they lost to Nebraska, and he's going to keep committing and decommitting depending on how they do through the end of the season. No.
Be clear you're making that up because there's going to be someone like on the message board. Fonseca said that.
It was a source.
It was a source. He cited a source. It must be true.
Didn't you make fun of me for saying that no one aggregates our podcast when I mentioned that earlier in the year? And now you're
this should be the one time that someone aggregates something from our podcast. It would be a joke that fell flat.
I am joking. Ace Bailey has not decommitted because they lost to Nebraska.
Ooh,
everybody, relax.
Okay.
And if it makes you feel better, Dylan Harper was playing while Rutgers played last night, so I don't think he even saw the game. So if you were worried that he is not even considering Rutgers anymore because they lost to Nebraska, I think everyone's fine there. Everyone take a breath, all right? I think you're right. Recruiting is not dependent on one game at a time. No kid is going to commit or decommit. Gavin Griffiths was at the Lafayette game last year, and we saw what happened there, right? A couple of other names. Kurtang, he's going to reportedly take an official visit to Rutgers next week for the Michigan game. He is a guy they offered last year, a 4-star guard. I think he'd fit really well on this team. He's a Michigan State lean per the industry. It's been for a while. I think this is more of him taking visits to be sure he wants to go to Michigan State rather than kind of testing his options. But you never know, right? You never know with recruiting. Donnie Freeman, he's not coming to Rutgers. He had Rutgers in his top 5 in January, shortly after he visited, but then he opened his recruitment back up, which means that because if you wanted to go to one of those 5 schools, he would just go there, right? He wouldn't open up his recruitment. I think he's going elsewhere. That's where we're at now. I think Dylan Harper, I don't think we've talked about this since last time we recorded. He dropped his top 5. He has Rutgers in it, obviously, and he told 247 that he's going to commit at some time in the summer. So that will be a while. Rutgers is still in it for him. I still think they have a good chance. Whether they get him or not, who knows? But to be in that race, obviously, is important. Okay. That's all I got on recruiting.
Good stuff. All right. And this is the final question. It's a hilarious one. Please discuss Spoilergate and whose fault it was. This is definitely a Rutgers Insider question. So we had a very nice request from one of our text subscribers that Brian stopped putting the score in his updates because this poor guy has kids, and I relate to this. You tape the game and you don't want your phone to beep and see, oh crap, what happened. So is that right? Is that what happened with the spoiler things?
That's exactly what happened. And he asked a couple times. I felt bad the second time. So I tried it out last night, and the response was, don't ever do that again. I got a couple of thank yous, and then I got a couple of, this is terrible. Please don't ever do this again.
Have you thought about just putting the score at the bottom of it? Have you thought about doing that instead of putting spoiler, just putting, we're here at half, blah, 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 and then putting the score?
I could. I guess the alternative is what people said. Just tell the guy to mute the conversation. I don't know.
Is this the most boring thing we've ever discussed in the podcast?
This is.
I mean, really, what
and
are
also,
we
if you put the score
here?
at the bottom, it goes against every rule of journalism. So you can't do it. Can't do it. The score goes at the top.
This has got to be it. This is going to be one. Yeah, this is truly the most boring topic we've ever tackled here in podcast history. And believe me, there have been some boring topics.
When I heard Spoilergate, I was thinking this was going to be juicy.
You thought it was going to be
I
something better
thought
than
this
this?
was going to be juicy.
Yeah. Instead,
Like-
it's about our texting service. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Brian has a really juicy story to tell.
Well, Brian does have a juicy story
Yeah.
to tell, he said. Well, this is, we're done with the
So
questions.
we could turn this
Right.
around real quick.
So as I'm making the script and Brian says, well, I got a funny story. Make sure you bring up the funny story. Pat knows about the funny story. You haven't heard the funny story since you were at the Super Bowl. So let me tell you, this better be a funny story.
Well, you just made it out like I'm Dave Chappelle going to tell. the
I
greatest football team of all
want
time.
at least, Jim Gaffigan level comedy here. I want something.
All right,
All
I'll go
right.
for Bill Burr.
Bill
So
Burr.
we're at Madison Square Garden,
Mhm.
and they didn't give us a media meal like they usually do. They gave us a voucher. So you go to the stands and you get your own meal or whatever. So it's before the game. I'm feeling a little hungry. The stands are opening up. I go there. I look at my options. I see a hot dog. I want a hot dog. I see a bag of M&Ms for dessert. I get a bag of M&Ms and I get a nice big cup of soda.
Okay.
So I'm walking back. You have to walk through the concourse back to your seat. So I'm walking back to the seat and I see a familiar face waiting for me at the stairs. I'm like, oh my God, Greg? It's Greg Schiano. Just waiting at the stairs. I'm like, oh, Greg, how you doing? Naturally, I instinctively reach out to shake his hand with the soda and the hot dog. And as I do it, my hot dog flips over. The box that I have a hot dog, it flips over, bangs on the floor, splits in half. My glizzy is all over the floor. And Greg Schiano's just watching this happen. He goes, oh no. And I'm frazzled. This is the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. So I pick up the hot dog and I throw it out, obviously. And then I hear Greg Schiano go, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I'm like, Greg, what do you mean? What am I doing? I just dropped a hot dog on the floor. He's like, he said something. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, "You kiss the hot dog and you pray to God that you don't get sick and you eat the thing." And I said, "Well, it's a little late now. It's in the garbage." But the moral of the story here is that Greg Schiano believes in the 5-second rule. So,
He does. Yes.
Yes.
So you just dropped. Talk about that's just people. Shanna's telling that story to people too. Like he's just.
The whole time as I'm picking up hot dogs, there's fans walking by. Coach, how you doing? Chop, chop, Coach. I love you, Coach. And I'm just there on my knees picking up a broken in half hot dog, starving out of my mind.
Did you have condiments on the hot dog?
No, but I had some mustard. I had mustard packets. Just my wife was watering, thinking about putting the mustard on the hot dog, and it was. And then I told Greg to save face that I was going to go buy another hot dog, and then the line was too long, so I didn't.
So you didn't get your hot dog. That's really the sad part about the story. It'd be funny if Greg. I was hoping Greg would have walked you back, like I would have done for my 6-year-old son after you dropped an ice cream cone. Like, don't worry, pal, we'll go back and get. No, he didn't even take you to get the next hot dog.
Well, he was waiting for his wife. She had just come out, and she at that point they kind of had to go to their seats. So that would have been funny, but I think I was humiliated enough. I don't think waiting in line for another hot dog with Greg Schiano would.
Okay, great. So you didn't eat? Tell me.
I ate M&Ms.
That's all you had?
That's all I had. Yes. Well, I was no longer hungry because I was just full of shame.
Full of shame.
It was. Yeah, I'm sure he's told people that story, or maybe he hasn't, which might be even more embarrassing. So
he might have been saying it's true, but Greg Schiano's a good man. He might have just been like, you know what? I'm going to keep this between me, Brian Fonseca, and the Madison Square Garden floor. But man, that is the worst thing that's ever happened at the Garden. That is sad, man. Ooh, good story though. Let's move on because I'm sad about that. What else we got? Wrestling team got smoked by a good team, Penn State. I saw.
Yes. Got smoked by two good teams, Penn State and Nebraska, two top 10 teams to close out the season. So they finished 10-7 overall, 2-6 in the Big Ten.
All right.
Their two Big Ten wins were against Michigan State and Maryland. Now they'll have 3 weeks off until the Big Ten tournament.
Okay. And everyone's calmed down about that. Last podcast, we were pretty fired. There's a big faction of people that are saying that the team is just regressing under Goodell. He's not the right guy. And then there's another faction that is like, everyone needs to relax. We finished the season number 23. We'll have a couple guys at the NCAA tournament. Let's just relax. So I'm more on that side of it all. I think they've got room to grow. They could bring back every single wrestler for that started this year if they wanted to, if they want to come back. Everyone has eligibility. Okay, well that's a good sign. Women's basketball, anything there? I saw there was a score like 60-12 against Iowa or something that was a little. Looks like they're playing the good teams in the Big Ten. Is that what's happening?
They were on pace to concede the most points in a Big Ten game ever.
Really?
Against Iowa. I think the record was 119. I think they ended up only giving up 117. So there we go. The ladies kept it from being a historic embarrassment. But the Big Ten has, I think, 3 or 4 top 15 teams. Sometimes you just run into a buzzsaw, right? No shame in that. They still have more wins than I think anyone expected. Another women's sport, women's lacrosse, off to a 1-0 start. They came back and defeated Jacksonville for another ranked win under Melissa Lemon. So the ladies keep rolling, and men's lacrosse is 2-0. Is Rutgers a lacrosse school? That might be our next conversation for the next pod.
You said no shame in that, and certainly you are one person who understands shame. Going back to the hot dog story.
Hot dog.
Oh, and also the I don't know if we talked about this yet.
Hot dog gate.
I like hot dog gate. I like Glizzy gate. We didn't talk about the Geo Baker thing, which is also very embarrassing. My workout with Geo Baker.
Oh, that's right. Yes, tell us about that day. That was It
was fun. It was really fun. Geo was a great sport about it. Michael was a great sport about it. When I asked him, he laughed. He laughed out loud. But I told him beforehand I was going. It was good.
If you're not aware, just tell us what you did. People might not have read the story.
Geo Baker, Rutgers legend. He does individual coaching now. He does like drill work with kids, local kids who try to, want to be like him. And so I decided to sign up and take a class. And I realized I am there. It was me and about 10 other 11 to 12-year-olds. And I was probably the second worst player there. And the worst player was probably 6 years old. So it was very tough. My jump shot was off. It didn't make the video because no one was recording, but I crossed myself over so hard that I skid across the floor at one point, and Gio was the only other person that saw it. But he was great. It was a good time. I've been working on my lefty dribble a lot recently, and I can happily report that it is not completely embarrassing anymore.
Did you at least put your elbow in the sternum of some unsuspecting 10-year-old from Edison? Did you at least knock a kid down or something?
No, there was a kid that challenged me to go one-on-one, and I said, "No, man, I'm too big for you. That's not cool." But the real reason was because I knew he would absolutely cook me like Thanksgiving turkey.
The theme of this podcast is a lot of shame today. That's all I can say. Maybe we should end on that note. Got anything else, Pat, to sign us off with?
Shame
on us. Shame on everybody. We'll be back next week, hopefully, to talk about a better week for Rutgers basketball. If not, I can only imagine where the panic button will be depressed. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Devco. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.